Hi everybody, welcome along to our second part of our two-part summer travel series for NCBI Advocacy Talks. It's great to have you all with us today. My name is Lorna Fitzpatrick and I'm the Advocacy and Engagement Manager with the NCBI, and we're delighted to welcome you to our session today. In a moment I'm going to introduce our speaker, and we're delighted to have our speaker with us today. But just to remind you all that all of our advocacy talks are a Q&A style event, so everybody has the option to pop a question into the question box or into the chat, and at the end of the session today I'll be able to present those questions to our speaker Paudie and get his take on the burning questions that you have around accessible travel and transport. So please do pop your questions into the Q&A or the chat box and we can come to those towards the end of the session today. But without any further ado, I'm going to introduce our guest speaker for our session today. We're delighted to be joined by Paudie Healy, who's the founder and CEO of Universal Access, a leading organisation who strives to improve accessibility and inclusion globally. Through their Universal Access platform, accessibility and disability inclusion framework, resources and maturity models, they deliver universal design, accessibility solutions, advisory and training services to the private and public sector in Ireland and internationally. Paudie sits as an accessibility and universal design expert on multiple committees for the European and international standards, and I think we'll hear a little about those a little bit later on. Developed and piloted the World's Tourism for All programme with the European Network for Accessible Tourism, ENAT, and is a valuable 500 solution provider, is part of an International Air Transport Accessibility Committee, IATA, and is on the Airport Council International, ACI, Accessibility Advisory Committee. Paudie is also a regular expert speaker globally on accessibility, and so we are absolutely delighted to have him here with us today to share his wealth of knowledge and experience, and we are absolutely thrilled to have you. So Paudie, I'm more than happy to hand over to you, and any questions that come in, I'll be able to pose them to you later on. But thanks so much for joining us, and Paudie, hand over to yourself.
Hi Lorna, thank you. Hello to everyone that's with us today. Delighted to be with the NCBI on this summer travel talks. So over the next 30 minutes, I'd like to just go through, maybe set a bit of context into what's accessible tourism, the barriers, and maybe some solutions as well. But I'm sure our listeners today know a lot of the barriers already. But I would be absolutely delighted to answer any questions, because at the end of the day, that's what this is about. It's about people getting the answers and knowing where to go for any solutions that are required. So I have just done up a very quick presentation that I'll take you through for the first 25-30 minutes. And as I said, we can go from there. Then after that, I just shared there, Lorna, now, so you could just tell me that we are up and ready. And we'll be good to go. Yeah, you can just tell me, Lorna, if we're good to go there.
Yeah, I can see that now, Paudie. And if you just want to minimize me on the bottom corner.
Excellent, that's it. And no disrespect, Lorna, where you go into the corner. So I suppose the first thing for us is, as it's all about for us, it's about people. It's never about disability. It's never about impairment. It's never about the health condition. Everyone knows what their any barriers that they have in their own private life. For us, it's about the infrastructure and making sure that we take away those barriers. So it's about leaving nobody out. In the travel journey, we look at the travel journey through the whole chain. And I think that's very important, because if you don't look at it and take it from a holistic perspective, what you do is you get breaks in the chain. And if you get breaks in the chain, then a person's experience is absolutely, in some cases, destroyed, because they have paid a lot of money or are looking forward to their experience maybe with 12-24 months. So when we look at it, we look at, first of all, for the information, because when we're looking at going on a holiday, we're looking at the searching, the bookings, the website, videos, apps. And when we're looking at that information, we must make sure that it's accessible. But of course, that's only to actually to look at where we can book and where we're going to go. We then have the next level, and where it's in transport. And the transport cuts across everything from getting to the airport, the vehicles we may travel, we may go on the public service, we may take a taxi. When we get to terminals, what's there, the transfers, the assistance that's there. So again, that's more part of the user journey. And then it's getting to the destination itself. The infrastructure. So that could be the attractions, the accommodations, the hotel, the restaurants, the streets, the beaches, anything that's to do with the public service at the destination. And of course, customer service, which is a huge thing. And we often find that sometimes, as bad as it is in all of the above, that good customer service can take away a lot of the barriers on its own. And good customer service just comes from people having knowledge and just being able to talk and communicate with people. It's as simple as that, but of course they must get training to do that, because sometimes it's about not being able to connect in a one-on-one with that customer. So why is there a problem in all of those areas, or is there a problem? That is the question. In my estimation, and from what we have looked at, there is big problems and big barriers. Because what people don't think of when they're designing, and this can come from the public sector, and starting at the very top from legislators, all the way down to the local authorities, the actual architects, engineers, the community itself and the businesses, they sometimes just don't think. It's not that they don't want to, but they don't think that people's needs change. And as we all know, as we move through life, our human life cycle, we may be born with a disability, but definitely if we live long enough, we're going to have a disability through wear and tear. That's a guarantee in life. So realistically, it's very important from the outset to be thinking, when we're ever making any changes for tourism, to think of the whole human life cycle. And when we look at the little template down here on the slide, there is no such thing as an average person. And that is very true. And as we know, through life, we lose our mobility and dexterity, our strength and stamina, reach and balance, speech and touch, sight and hearing, and memory and sense of direction. So it's very important that we're able to come with a universal approach. And if we come with that universal approach, that means that everyone can experience with independence and equity what they want to do, travel to, or where they want to go on a holiday, a short break or a long-term break. What are the barriers though for up to 25% of the population? Offerings and the experience, they only focus on an average person. Unfortunately, that is the case, where we don't look at the wider element of that human cycle, as I was talking about on the last slide. The quality of our infrastructure, our transport, our services, everything I went through earlier on the first slide, that is a problem and that is a barrier. The changing needs of employees are not met, and that's another thing that we must focus on, because if we get it right for the traveller and we have that universal design approach, that inclusive approach, then we will be doing the same for our employees. And what does that mean? It allows us to get to a wider pool of people that may have a disability, or secondly, as our needs change as employees, we're able to make sure that we have those reasonable adjustments in place and that we can continue in employment. And a big feedback that we get is no independent verified information about accessibility. And that is a huge problem, because what is put up in websites is sometimes very misleading. And it's very simple, because you can get access guides now and things like that to take information that will be produced, and so that you can make an independent decision. Is it good for you or is it not, into the destination that you are traveling? The guess, and this is these are all from statistics that we have been gaining continuously internationally. So what do guests look for in inclusive tourism? 95% of people with impairments try to access information before they visit a place. Now that is huge, And this is what I'm saying about, and to do that, you must have an accessible website and also have the information up there in the first place. So that's a huge thing. 86% have found accessibility information to be misleading, and this is where the problems start, as I said, because you can only go on what is presented to you. But the key thing here is another 86% said they're more likely to visit somewhere new if they can find the relevant, accurate information. 47% of people will avoid going to a venue if the venue hasn't shared this access information. That's huge, and that's a miss out to the industry. And I'll go through some of the statistics later on the financial missing out that these businesses is happening right now. 86% say they would make a return visit if the venue had good accessibility, and 83% will tell others if the venue has good accessibility. Now, that's 83% of free marketing that you will get, businesses get by making their premises accessible, by giving that information, by giving that experience that people can enjoy and make their independent decision and get the experience with equity. But of course, the tourism industry itself, and that will be from all the way, as I said, through from the airports right down into hotels, restaurants, the streets, the public services. The problem for the tourism industry is the visitor needs and requirements are unknown or misunderstood. Therefore, the market is divided, and that's what they look at. It's easier to avoid than to make the wrong decision. But of course, we all know that is wrong. It's only about asking and bringing people with disabilities being included in decision making them part of the process, because at the end of the day, nobody knows better that it's what's good for them than the person themselves. Investment costs, they're always over exaggerated, because there's very much a lot of low-hanging fruit that you can do for nothing within the business, and I'll go through some of that later in the presentation. Tourism for all as a whole, a type of tourism, is not understood. Of course, then the business growth and the sustainability is missed, and that's a huge problem for the industry in what they're missing out. And especially when we go into the shoulder season and they're trying to extend these seasons, and it's not there, because if you can't provide for a person in the shoulder season, they're not going to come, obviously. Missed recruitment opportunities, and of course there is always the possibility then of potential litigation. So the makeup of the tourism industry, when we say tourism for all, what do we really mean by tourism for all? Well, we bring it into three main segments when we're trying to take away the barriers. The first is for young families, because 1 out of every 5 domestic holiday trips are families with children. 850,000 family home holiday trips are in Ireland a year, and families stay longer and spend more, and they also come in the shoulder season. But of course, we all know from the moment somebody becomes pregnant, right all the way through the pregnancy and to young children into adulthood, there is barriers along the way. And we must remove those barriers the exact same way, because if we remove it at this stage, we'll remove it for everyone along that travel chain. The ageing population is another one. And if we see it by 2041, 1.4 million will be over the age of 65. That'll be nearly 22% of the Irish population alone. And at the moment, there's over 1 billion people in the world that are over 60. But again, we need the barriers removed. There's disposable income to be spent from this population. They want experiences. They want it both nationally and internationally. But to do so, we need to remove the barriers so that they can go and enjoy that experience with equity. Just another few facts there from the European Commission on the senior market. And what they said is they stay longer in the destination. 25% of Europeans are over the age of 60. The companions with older people travel with 1.6 companions. So that's, again, you're beginning to it's not person on its own, it's nearly 2 people at all times. To take 6 to 7 trips per year in Europe alone, and I'm just doing European stats at the moment. They have more disposable income because at that stage it's retirement. You have people that are that have their disposable income and their pensions, so they want to travel, they spend more, and they want to travel in the off-peak season. They don't want 9 times out of 10 in the peak summer with the hot sun. They like to travel more in the off season. That's directly from the European Commission on the latest research. And then when we move on to people with disabilities, and this is a huge, huge amount of people in the world. That's our mother, our father, our brother, our sisters, our aunts, our uncles. It's our friends, it's our work colleagues, it's every one of us. So it's very important when we go to look and when we're designing tourism that we're not leaving out everyone I said there, because we need only start with our family. And if we don't start to develop and design a product or a service in tourism and to take everyone's needs into consideration, well, straight away we're saying no to our family, no to our friends, no to our work colleagues, and that's just not good enough. But if we want to look at it and be more critical from a business perspective, we can see that there's over 8 trillion is the spending power of people with disabilities. So not alone, if you don't want to do it from being a good person, there's the economical spend. And I'll start to prove that from 3 countries later on in our slides here, which will show you the value out of their country when they really started to concentrate on accessible tourism. When we bring in family and friends, it accounts for 45% of the world population. So that's a huge amount of people. And as we know, because I come from a background where I have a family member with a disability myself, and we've to always make the decision. The person with the disability makes the decision, and then we all travel to that destination. But this is the real sorry part of it. Only 4% of businesses are focused on making offerings inclusive of disability. And that is huge, and it just shows the amount of work we have to do, the amount of advocacy we have to do. We have an awful lot of work still going forward in advocacy, in designing and getting the legislation, the policy right, and making sure that everyone is treated with that equity. When I was talking there about quantifying the growth in countries that have developed accessible tourism, I'm going to show you some of them now, and they're all our neighbouring countries. So in the UK, when they looked at the tourism, accessible tourism, some years back, they looked at where was the gaps and where could I have room for economic growth. And accessible tourism was one of the areas they identified. And as you can see right here, they have over 15 billion extra on tourism, where spent with trips where a member of that party had an impairment. This is not me saying this is out of their own tourism board. But as you can see here, the people with disabilities in the travelling party stayed longer and they spent more. So that was a huge level in the first place. You go to the neighbouring country of Scotland, and it's 1.5 billion sterling where a member spent in the trips where a member of the party had an impairment. And again, you begin to see over a 4-year period, when there was when they started taking accessible tourism, there was a 21% increase in their tourism, and overall for people with tourism in general, it was down 3%. So you can see even when tourism was down, that people with accessible tourism, if you put the infrastructure in place, were travelling. So this is a huge element of showing the economic level. And let's go to a completely different continent around the world, and let's go to Australia. And again, another country that's beginning to concentrate on accessible tourism, and the expenditure in Australia was 8.9 billion Australian dollars. And they broke it down separate. The very 3 areas that I spoke about earlier were people with disabilities, where there was a 3.3 billion Australian dollars income from it, older population 2.9 billion, and young families 2.7. And what they have said in their last report was inclusive tourism is growing faster than any other market segment. So people will have to stand up and sit up and hear this, because this is changing markets. It's going to get, because of people getting older, people getting impairments as they grow older, and obviously when you look at different people, different neurodiversity now, it's getting a lot more a bigger challenge to the industry to make sure that they can cater for everyone's need, not separately but inclusively, and that's absolutely paramount. Ireland, when you look in Ireland, there is, from a tourism perspective, that we all know it's of course a huge amount of money every year, but what are we missing out? And the key one that I want to look out here is a potential 44% increase in demand per year for accessible tourism if appropriate services were put in place. And that's absolutely huge. And in 9% out of 3 million in the EU 28 tour services are some way accessible. That's all that's out there. 9% are some way accessible in the EU last assessment. But of course, it all comes from how do we approach this? How do we start this market? And a lot of this comes from a universal design approach. And a universal design approach, when we look at this slide here, this is a bridge. I'm not sure, does everyone know where it is, but it's in Vienna. And they wanted to join over the water from the dry land, both sides, to get over the water. So you can imagine all the people that was involved in this. So there would be the public sector, because as the local authority, there would have been procurement, there would have been architects, there would have been engineers, there would have been committees. If you're making a landmark and spending that kind of money to make a landmark in your city to join one end of the dry land to the other, you can be sure there was a lot of people involved. And what did they come up with? They came up with a bridge that had steps. Not alone had its steps, but it had different size steps. And if that wasn't good enough, they put glass in some parts of the bridge. And then what we had was nobody could hardly cross it. So people with suitcases, buggies, rollators, crutches, persons using wheelchairs, it became a nightmare for everyone. And finally, they had to put, as you see in the top right hand corner, they had to put this bubble on there so that people could get over the bridge. And I think it takes around 20 minutes to cross in that bubble. But straight away, you see, for something that was supposed to connect and allow people to transfer from one end over the water to the other end, all of a sudden became a barrier on its own, because it wasn't thought out. And that's the key thing. It was more about the aesthetics. It was more about people, this fantastic bridge with steps and glass and everything, but the functionality wasn't thought out. And definitely for people with disabilities and aging, it wasn't thought out. But yet, when you go and look at the London Bridge, it was a universal design approach, because it had the different levels, but it was all level access, and people could travel no matter what age, what they were carrying, what they were using as supports. Everyone could get across the bridge independent and equally. And that's the difference about the approaching. And it has to be, and that's what I'm saying, when we're thinking about accessible tourism or tourism for all, it has to be a universal design approach. It has to be from the outset that we think about it. Everyone has to be part of it, but more importantly, people with disabilities have to be made part of that decision-making process. That is critical from the outset. And people say to me often, but putting up grab rails and putting up different support aids, it'll take the look out of my venue. And I'm saying no, it does not, because out in the industry right now, there's a lot of solutions that actually enhance the offering. Not alone allows everyone to be part of it and experience the offering, but it actually even looks better as well. And if you see here, these are just 2 bathrooms, and inside in those bathrooms, you have grab rails, but due to the way they're designed, the aesthetics, you actually don't even know they're grab rails because they're on slides across the walls, and they can be taken off or left on. So all of a sudden, inside in that hotel, you can change that bathroom to the user's need. So it can be changed on a daily basis. And when a person is not needing, say, the seat or the support seat inside in the shower, that can be taken off the rail immediately, and housekeeping can put it away. And the next day when the user come in, they can just put it back up again. But there is no rails or nothing because the rails are enclosed with the color of the tile. So again, there's aesthetics and there's solutions out there if people want to go down that road. Here in the menu, we often say that is simple. Remember, I was talking about low-hanging fruit at the outset. In the standard menu, for me anyway, in most restaurants, it excludes. Personally, myself, and I go into a restaurant and I would say that I have good eyesight, but I end up trying to look at the menu up to my face, or else take a screenshot of it on my phone or turn the light on my phone. And is that good business? I don't think it is. But yet, if they wanted a solution for everyone without spending very little money, and what I'm talking now is a couple of euro, that's it, a couple of euro, have a menu in plain font, having a spare set of glasses, magnifying glass, have the menu available in a bigger font, a pictogram menu, and there's now menu scanners available where the menu can be read out, and I'm sure here in the NCBI know it very well, that with even assistive technology, and what a difference 1, 2 or 3 or 4 of those things that have cost very little money would do to a person. It would absolutely change a person's life, because you can go into a restaurant and you can independently select your own food. And that's all we're asking for. It's no bigger than that. And these are the solutions. There's hundreds of those solutions out there for the industry. But it's only about being aware of those, and of course for the industry to be accepting of them in the first place. And that's very, very important. Right through COVID, that became a huge topic. And simple little things like sanitizers. And you see somewhere they had a universal sanitizer, and more places foot operated. Now, the foot operated sanitizer excluded an awful lot of people. And not alone that, but in some places where they were put, they became a barrier on their own. So these are the things that I'm thinking about. Even when our biggest cause for a global health problem that was global, we didn't get the right solution in a joint up approach. And again, as I said from the outset, by including people with disabilities from the outset in the decision process, all of this would be sorted immediately. But it just takes that advocacy. I think we have a lot more to do on that. I won't go into legislation, but there's a huge amount of acts out there now, and a European Accessibility Act, and there's a new tourism standard that I will talk about in a minute as well, that where people no longer will have excuses. The solutions are there, the process is there. It'll become down to policy, legislature, tourism state agencies, the industry themselves. They will have to make the decision. It's really up to them now, saying that the solutions are there, and the people have to say, the advocate, we know that there's still barriers there, but we also know there are solutions there. So when we go and look at everything that we've put it all together there, when we look at this tourism for all approach, what does it deliver? Well, it delivers economic, sustainable and social results. And that's for everyone, from our legislators right down to the industry itself. They're able to increase, retain and increase their market share, increase their bottom line revenue, attract the business in the shoulder season, as I said, because people will travel once they're able to get to destination and be able to use and interact in that destination, increase and repeat business loyalty. And a huge thing as well is position the business to provide a world-class inclusive service. And that's what we're trying to do. Just have an inclusive service. That's absolutely paramount and underpins everything. It's that to future-proof the asset, because remember now, like I showed on the bridge, if that was done at universal approach from the outset, then everyone would be able to cross it. And they wouldn't have to be going retrofitting, they wouldn't have to put in that bubble. So in the end, it cost them more money by actually having to retrofit it and came out with a worse product. And so it's about getting that right from the outset. And if we do that, we make the business sustainable then. If we don't have to be retrofitting it, if we can get more users to use it, it becomes a way better product and it becomes economically viable and sustainable. And of course, if we don't, it's also helping to reduce potential litigation, because with the new conventions that are out, with people beginning to know their rights better, to get that equality of service, people, this is the only way forward. People will have to stand up and say, no, that's not acceptable. If I'm buying a product or I'm buying a service, I want it equal. I want to get that with equity. I have every right to do that. And yes, you do have every right to do that. And the final couple of things is increasing the brand value for the business, getting to a wider pool of employees, as I said, and that's very paramount. Whenever we look at what we do in our work, we also always look at getting making sure it's both focused for the customer and employees, because we see that there's a direct correlation to make sure people with disabilities are included in both elements. And of course, finally, then adhering to laws and regulations to align with the 2030 sustainable goals, where disability cuts across a huge amount of those. So very quickly, that's just a whistle tour. I could concentrate on any of those slides right across every element all day long, but I know our time was short here. I tried to give about 30-35 minutes, and I think I'm dead on time to allow for questioning thereafter. And I'm really open to and looking forward to any questions, because at the end of the day, what we want to do is universal access. We work across all industries, all sectors, and we want to make sure that we're continuously carrying the fight to the industry and to take away these barriers and to make sure that everyone's included. It's not an easy journey. We all have to be part of the journey. We all have to make sure that everyone keeps this on the agenda at both political level, legislation level, local authority level, and within the industry itself. That is critical, because the very minute we take our foot off the pedal on that, that is when it dies, and when it dies down, we're really then having to start up again to start our campaigns. So very quickly, I'm going to stop presenting there now and try to get Lorna back, I think, there. If you're there, Lorna.
I am indeed, yeah. How are you?
Very good, very good. So that's a very quick whistle tour, Lorna, on the tourism, on accessible tourism. So I'm not sure what you would like to. Did any questions come in, or where you might have some questions yourself, of course.
There's lots, yes. And I'm conscious I have a bit of an echo. So I might, Paudie, oh, I think it's stopped there now. I think the echo has calmed down, whatever gremlin was in the system. So thank you so much for that. I think I was scribbling notes, so many different notes throughout, and we have got some questions that have came through. So I might kick off with the first one, which is just around, I suppose, what the industry is doing internationally to improve and ensure that accessible tourism, I suppose. And I know you referenced some international standards and those kind of pieces. So I wonder, maybe, is there anything that you can touch off in relation to that first? And then I have at least two more, but maybe some more will come in while you're answering that one as well.
No, that's fantastic. Yeah, and it's a very good question, Lorna. Yes, so there's a couple of areas, and I really believe that once you explain to people the barriers in the industry, they really want to help and they want to make it happen. But the problem is they just don't understand that there's barriers there in the first place. And this is and sometimes when, say, a person approaches them and they're frustrated, the points gets lost in translation, and then there becomes a bigger barrier because the industry just runs away from it. So what we try to use most of the time is lots of carrot and just a small bit of stick. That's our approach anyway. So on the tourism standard there's a new, for the first time ever, I worked in it from an Irish perspective, an ISO, an international standard on accessible tourism. So that's the first tourism standard that any country can use in how to build accessible tourism, and it takes you through the whole chain from transport, policy, right down into hotel, restaurant, and it's all high level. But what it does for any policymaker or any industry leader, it allows them to follow on what to do right. So that would be the first place I would point people to look to, and that can be got through the National Standards Authority here in Ireland, the NSAI. And I believe actually one of your own team, former team, was part of that standards committee before, so the NCBI are big advocates in this role as well. So that's the first standard. The second one I'm doing last year with an International Air Transport Association, IATA. So they would control 93% of the skies and airports globally, and always they have a manual they bring out every 4 years for the industry, and it was always this PWD, people with disabilities, which I hate, Lorna. I don't like that word, that's why I don't when we're talking about people. But anyway, I understand that's what they have in the industry at the moment. But they had a book, and they had only, out of that 900-page manual, they had only 6 pages on people with disabilities. That was it. Yet when we see today, when we look at people with disabilities and the older generation, we're talking over a quarter of the traveling community. But in fairness to them, they see it. They brought us on and we do a lot of this work voluntary as well, in a capacity to look at where this could be changed. And of course, when you're doing change, you're going to meet resistance. So we had to use a lot of carrot here with different, because it was the industry itself that you were working with and bringing in people with disabilities as well. So on this one, in their new manual that's out now, we've got a full section leading in the manual on universal design and trying to bring that awareness to people. And the accessible part of it has gone up to over 35 pages. So yeah, that was a big win in the industry, but hands off to IATA, because they are really trying to look. It's not going to be right overnight. This is the continuous, and people still have to advocate. We always hear of horrendous stories in travel in airports and aircrafts still, but I suppose until we keep progressing together, the consumers from one end and the likes of us from another end, with the industry and trying to tell them what to do, and I think there's only then that we'll gain success. But at least they're at the starting blocks now, and they're starting to move forward, which is fantastic. And they've come to us, so they wanted to do it themselves. So that's a huge thing. The next one is it's Airports Council International, ACI. And right at this current moment, we're retained to do out a new questionnaire for those. We're working internationally with international disability organisations on this, and that's for them internally. They want to run a programme for their own members in airports and how to start making them accessible. Now, that's only starting. We're only starting to do it at the moment. But again, tis ACI have come and looked for this. So there is movement out there. They are understanding, they are noticed changing needs, and they want to meet the demand of their changing consumer as well. And of course, the other one then, the bigger movement at the moment internationally is led by our own Irish lady, Caroline Casey from Dublin, in the Valuable 500. And in the Valuable 500, on a personal capacity, I'm advising into the Valuable 500, but on a wider capacity than the company, our company Universal Access, that's the solution provider. And that's where 500 of the top corporates are trying to make a change for disability inclusion. And it's not diversity, even everyone supports diversity, but we're very clear here, this is disability inclusion, because sometimes disability gets lost inside in diversity. Diversity is a big wide word, and sometimes it's too wide. So we need to make sure that we're very focused in what we are doing, what we're trying to deliver, and where the barriers are. So internationally, there's a huge amount, and the other one then is the European Network for Accessible Tourism, and that's a huge organisation, ENAT, where it's made up of members from everything from state agencies to down to individual members of experts, down to part of the European Commission, doing half of the work there for the European Commission. But it's, again, it's a website that people can look and get a lot of information on travel off of for themselves, but also see what's happening. They might get IDs, they'll be able to connect onto experts, and that's what it is. It's a network, and the network works at different levels, and sometimes there we work in a huge amount of European projects where it might be made up of industry, consumers, universities, state agencies, and disability advocates, which could be the likes of the NCBI and things like that themselves, who would be all form part of the one project. And that's why we always say is, and I know it is a slogan, nothing for us without us, and I think that's very important out there as well, Lorna. So at a high level, that's 5 things that are going on, but I think it's great. At last, it's not advocating for those changes, it's the industry itself beginning to come and say, hey, we know there's a problem here. It's not going to be fast, but I think the more of, say, the NCBI, people that are on this webinar today, the more people keep advocating and just not accepting it. And that's what it comes down to, just not accepting the normal. We can't accept just a standard offering. If we need something, a tweak or a change in it, the solution is there. So it's only about them putting in that solution, Lorna, as far as we are concerned.
Oh, that's fantastic, Paudie. Thanks so much. And you've mentioned a couple of different pieces there, be it the standards or the Valuable 500 or ENAT. And just so everybody on the call is aware, I'll link those into the footnotes. All of our sessions are recorded and we place them up on YouTube. So I'll make sure that all of those links are included within our YouTube footnotes. If anybody wants to click through and find out more about any of those pieces that Paudie has referenced there. But I think you're right, Paudie, around you know, it is moving, and it's the industry that's recognising, after years of people advocating to get us to the point where the industry now recognises that that is the case, and that changes need to take place to ensure that they're accessible. And like your slides actually show, you know, from a corporate business bottom line perspective, you know, why it's important from that side, but also then from a human side, and you know, that inclusive nature, and the experiences that people can have through inclusive travel and through inclusive spaces, and the impact that that can have on people on a day-to-day as well. So there's two sides of the coin, and that argument seems to be made. It's obvious, it's evident. So it is just about getting it across the line in all different spaces. And you mentioned there about the importance of people, I suppose, continuing to push back and continuing to not accept the norm and push back against that norm that's there. And I suppose we have local advocacy networks that are right across the country that are trying to create that change in their local environment in whatever way that may be. And one of the questions actually came through from our local advocates, one of the facilitators of our local advocacy network, and I'll come to that in a moment. But the other question that came through was just around, who do you start with? So the people who are on the call here today, to push back, to try and get that legislative change, to try and get that progress, I suppose, continuing across the board, be it in hotels. Do you contact the industry? Do you contact the legislators? Do you contact the local councillors? Who do you think is the first point of contact? I suppose you could do all of them, but recognising time and all of those types of constraints, who do you think is the best person or people to make that initial contact to tell stories and to try and continue to advocate for that inclusive changes?
Yeah, it's a great question, and of course, from our perspective, we go after everyone. But you are right. That takes a bit of time and it takes a bit of skill to get in around the corners to get to these people. But I think if you were local and you have a business, I think that business wants your business. So it's about talking with them, and I think that sometimes you're able to give them the solution. So all of a sudden they're getting free advice and free consultancy for a solution. of course, the benefit for you as the person then as the consumer is you're getting your service with equity, and that's what we want at the end of the day. So from the small levels, I would because some people have this, I don't know why it is, but some in the industry think, oh, this is going to cost me huge money, or I have to make all these structural changes. And 9 times out of 10, it can be something as simple as biases. And we do an awful lot of disability awareness and training now for the hospitality sector. And we're able to get them like grants of up to 90% for that training. And like, why wouldn't they use that training? But if you take away the biases, the actual anything that's physical in a physical infrastructure is not as big a problem or as big a barrier, then there's a way around that. But it's about treat that person with respect. So I would start with the local side of it. That's definitely. After that, I would keep plugging in the ear of the legislators, because at the end of the day, it has to be changed from a legislation and policy. But why I wouldn't put my emphasis on that first is that takes time. The wheel is slow to turn there, and the likes of the NCBI does great work on behalf of its members on that anyway. But it's very important though that the members as well put in their speak when you come look for your vote at local elections or national elections. That's your time. But it's, to tell you the truth, Lauren, it's the exact same there. It's about telling your story. That's all it is. Don't make it up. Don't change it. Don't increase it. Just tell it as it is. Because at the end of the day, legislators are human. And if you can connect them in that human capacity, they'll begin to understand. Of course, we know it's harder as it gets bigger because they have people tying and pulling from different parts of that pot the whole time. But it's about if we get enough of people in a movement. And when we think about movements, and we see movements all over the world and different levels for different things, what is often so surprisingly, the people with disabilities is nearly made up of the biggest amount of people in the world, and it's increasing every day with aging and everything. And yet our movement sometimes don't be united enough to get to that level and to make that change and say, we're not standing for this no more. And that's what it's coming is about, that united. So to answer your question here, which was a very good question, I would start at the local side. After that, I would put in possibly, I would let the likes of the agency know, for whether it be, if it's hotels, you have the IHF, or if it's restaurants, the Restaurants Association, experiences. And I would just make it up along the line, even to Fault Ireland, because they have a huge amount to play here in this country. And now that we have this tourism standard, international tourism standard out, there is no more excuses to say, oh, well, we didn't know where to start. But because we now have a standard to show us where to start, we have experts within the industry, we have agencies like the NCBI, and we have your members, which are the end users and the most important people. So there's actually no excuses. So that's the way I would move it up along the chain, up to your, and finish off with your legislators. But again, as I said, legislators as they come to you, or if you have a local connection with them, because that is the slowest amount to change. So that just takes a little bit of time, Lorna.
Yeah, we're well used to taking a little bit of time to get an awful lot of those changes across the line when it comes to the legislative side of things. But yeah, I think the point you make there around local businesses want your business, I think is a really good point, and something that can land home or with an awful lot of people, I'd imagine, who are on the call as well. And as you say, an awful lot of the time it's not out of badness, it's just out of lack of awareness. Yeah. In an awful lot of cases. So having those conversations are so important. And what I think is really valuable now is that we have that international standard, which we can couple with the human experiences, with the lived experiences that the people on this call and other people with disabilities have when they're having those kind of conversations, whether that's with the local businesses or whether that's with the politicians or whatever it is. You're coupling the best practice standards and the guidance. And, you know, we often say sometimes that can be a little bit high level and can be, you know, it's not that human element. Whereas if you're coupling that with the human element of the stories and the international standards, and you're bringing both of those together, you're presenting the carrot in many ways, I suppose, in the way in which you've presented it there, Paudie. So thanks so much. And the final question that I've got through so far is actually from one of our facilitators of one of our local advocacy networks that are looking at accessible accommodation and hotels and things like that in Ireland at the moment, and they're trying to reach out to different hotels to ask about their accessibility, what they have in place, and I suppose maybe try and create a bit of a list of places that they can kind of share amongst their networks and say, these are guys who came back to us and said that this is what they have in place, and you know, whether it's that they're close to a Lewis stop or a bus stop, or they have some transport going between the hotel and the local train station, or whatever it may be, alongside the actual facilities inside the hotel or B&B or whatever it may be. And I suppose that just one of the questions that has been put forward there is there a platform that advertises accessible accommodation, or you know, is that interpretation of accessibility, I suppose, different across the board, or is there that kind of standard home that you can go to search for accommodation that's maybe you can select different accessibility features within it or anything like that, or is that something that we still need to try and tackle?
Yeah, it's a good question again. I think it's tackled in different ways by different people within the industry. The problem is we've technology out there now that in some platforms that allows for this information to be put up, but the biggest barrier I see to that, Lorna, sometimes is it's self-assessed. So it's assessed by the industry owner themselves, and in the end of the day, I no disrespect to the industry, but I'm sure they're going to put nothing bad, or they're not going to put the barriers up, and that's where I have the problem with it. So what we kind of like to do is, and if I can give an example, about 3 or 4 years ago, we started off with a hotel group, and we said, look, let's take it step by step. So training was the first perspective. So because why training? It's first of all, it has to come from the culture of the organization. So it has to be about the leadership. So if the owner doesn't buy into it and he doesn't see the both from a customer experience perspective and from an economic perspective, you're fighting a losing battle. And why? Do you know what? If he doesn't, you just move and go to the next one, because somebody will, the next one will see it. But if you get in the training, create that culture. And as I said, it's about then it's senior management to understand that accessibility becomes part of like their finance, like their sales and marketing, like their health and safety, like everything they do in their departments, accessibility is part of that. Once they begin to understand it, then it's to bring it down the line to operations, because I'm always saying the person, it doesn't matter what's your role within the, you know, say a hotel we're talking about now, or a restaurant or bar or an experience, but the person that is brushing the floor has more experience than anyone, because they see the people, they interact with people, and sometimes, or in the industry, they're the last people they go to interact with and get feedback. So what I say is they're the first people I would go to. I would go to the person that's communicating every day of the week. The next thing we did on that was we went in and policy, it has to become part of your policies, and not a separate policy, but it cuts across all your policies in each of your department. And that's not a huge thing. It's just about thinking it out logic, and it becomes part of tied to your mission, your values, and all of that side of it. And after that, yes, we do look at an audit, because we feel you have to get a starting place to see where you're trying to get to and to produce that action plan. But when they get an action plan, it's not to run the sprint, it's about the marathon. It's about that picking away bit by bit off of it, because every day you do something, and that could be once a month that you're making a change or a tweak, but that's affecting somebody's change in their life at a huge level and making a massive change. And then creating that access guide, as I said, exactly what you said there. So the answer to your question is, if it's done internally and if it can be done independently, better again. Because you know the information that you're getting is accurate and is verified, and as things change, of course, it always has to be updated. That it has. But I'm going to finally say on this group now are the people that be ringing us up. Right, what's next? Where do we go to? What do we do? And something so simple there about 2 years ago. I went in and they said they've changed all their signage, and I said, oh no, this is they've never come to this. And you know what? And I know it sometimes is not often used sometimes in the industry, and never hardly used in the industry, but they had Braille up on all their signs. And but my point is they did that because of the culture and without the training in the first place. And why I said the training is because they got the grants for that. And that cost them very little, but they learned so much for it, and it became part of the culture. And that group now, that group here in Ireland, does a huge amount for people with disabilities staying, because they have a huge amount of offerings, and they understand. They'll say themselves they don't get everything right, but the most important is they're willing to learn. And finally, I will say on this group, because I'm going to use it as a kind of a case study, Lorna, for their own staff meetings, once a month, they used to have a coffee morning for all disability organisations, different disability organisations with different disabilities, to come in and talk to their staff for 20 minutes or a half an hour. So it could be the likes of a local NCBI one morning, it could be the Irish Wheelchair Association the next morning or on the next month. But what it does is they were interested, they took the learnings from real lived experiences, and that's where we're trying to get people in the industry. But the point being is, if one group can do it within the industry like this, everyone can do it, but the attitude and the want must be there in the first place. But to finally answer your question, there is platforms out there, but it depends. I'd always look, where was the information, where was it got from? Was it, if it's self-assessed or if it's independent verified? There are two very different things, and that's critical. As we know, if you're spending a lot of money in your travel, you want to make sure that you're getting the right, that's what it says in the can is on the can when you get there.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Paudie, and thanks very much. I think it's a really important piece for us to remember around whether it's self-assessed or whether it's independently verified, because as you say, that can have a very different end result for the user at the end of the day. And actually, just what you mentioned there around the signage with Braille and so on, like you're spot on around the fact that came from a cultural change and wouldn't have been something that was considered or came to mind if that training hadn't been a piece, and if they didn't have those coffee mornings on a monthly basis, hearing directly from the lived experience and figuring out the different things that they can do to try and make their group more accessible. And it brings to mind an event on the 28th of September that NCBI will be hosting, which is the International Day for Universal Access to Information. And we're hosting a seminar on the 28th for local government, for engineers, for town planners, for businesses, for industry, around access to information. And the journey planning information that you had mentioned as part of your slides is one of the papers that we're developing. Another is around Braille and tactile signage, and that's a second. So you were really touching off of everything that was going through on our to-do list for our seminar on the 28th, and you've mentioned them all. So I'm glad we're on the right track. But it shows that those conversations are already happening and are already taking place, which is absolutely fantastic. So look, without further ado, I just want to say thanks very much for your time, Paudie, and thank everyone for joining us here today. As always, we'll be placing this session up on our YouTube channel. So if anyone joining us today didn't get a chance to, or knows of somebody who maybe didn't get a chance to click in today but would like to hear about what was discussed, please do share the YouTube link with them. And of course, our local advocacy networks will continue to try and tackle these issues and challenge the different industries and different corporates and so on, and government and legislators around ensuring that we have inclusive spaces for all people, but particularly people who are blind or vision impaired. So thanks everyone for joining us today. As always, if you ever need any additional support or have any queries around anything that's taken place within NCBI or within the advocacy team, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. You can find all the information on ncbi.ie or drop us an email on campaigns@ncbi.ie, and we'll be able to follow up with you. But thanks once again, Paudie, for your time today and for such a really insightful and educative presentation. I think we've all taken a lot from it. Gurmila Magad, thanks very much.
My pleasure, Lorna. My pleasure. Thank you. Bye.